I am Vivian Holt. At 42, I orchestrated the closure of a $3.8 billion integration between Star Systems and North Point Defense. The transaction required 18 months of careful groundwork, 8 strategic retreats, and a final 3-day negotiation marathon with dual legal teams stationed on different floors of the same hotel. When it concluded, I didn't seek recognition. Instead, I requested robust intellectual property transfer protections. That was my form of celebration. My official role was Chief Strategy Officer, but in reality, I had designed every operational mechanism, every international clause, every contingency plan for when reality diverged from projections. And it always did. That's what gave strategy its value. Yet 1 week after the final signatures, I was summoned to a special alignment review with the new CEO. He avoided the term demotion, preferring recalibration. He claimed the organizational structure needed space to breathe, given our transition to a more scaled and developmental phase. I can still picture that conference room vividly. Neutral colors, frosted glass, lighting designed to obscure fingerprints and soften harsh tones. 2 silent observers occupied the far end, too present to be uninvolved, too early to represent legal counsel. I remained largely silent. The script was already written. My chair had been subtly repositioned 2 feet from the table's head, not removed dramatically, just relocated. This was their preferred method, gentle, administrative, treating career trajectories like spreadsheets requiring consolidation. They assured me the title would remain temporarily, but decision-making authority would shift to a new operating lead from Boston. He had been monitoring our work with apparent admiration. His resume featured impressive bullet points. Mine bore actual signatures. But this wasn't about track records. It was about perception. I could see it in Marcus, our interim CEO, constantly adjusting his sleeves. Overprepared, slightly rehearsed, performing respect without any intention of follow-through. By meeting's end, my calendar was cleared for the quarter, my direct reports reassigned, and my name removed from the cross-functional platform task force, something I had initiated, nurtured, and refined from inception. They suggested I spend the coming month observing, reflecting, and providing advice as needed. They called it a sabbatical. I knew better. Sabbaticals don't include access credential revocation. That evening, I returned to my workstation for what I anticipated would be my final visit that week. I didn't pack belongings or create drama, but I took one calculated step. I accessed the back-end contract system, not to modify or download, simply to observe. I wanted to gauge how quickly they would pivot. The answer came by midnight. A revised presentation titled Next Chapter had appeared on the executive drive. It was mine, my framework, my roadmap, with one crucial alteration. My name had been replaced with Corporate Strategy Office, pending. If you're still reading this, perhaps during your lunch break or while departing as I did, leave evidence of your presence. Tell me your location. I want to understand how far such stories travel. I reviewed that presentation 3 times, not from ego, but for precision. They hadn't modified the delivery rhythm, recommendation sequence, sourcing logic, or risk summary syntax. They didn't need to. They believed I had retreated, accepting my legacy as a footnote rather than a foundation. The building's atmosphere shifted immediately. Individuals who once approached me directly now hesitated. Questions that would have come straight to me were redirected elsewhere. In every update meeting, they acknowledged me as if I remained part of the process, while systematically excluding me. It wasn't personal, they would claim. It was strategic. But so was I. There was something they never noticed in that original roadmap, something embedded 3 layers beneath the Gantt charts and cost projections. A transfer clause, legally valid but dormant, labeled Joint IP Oversight, contingent upon operational removal. I had inserted it myself 19 months prior. They hadn't triggered it yet, but inevitably they would. They always do. The position appeared on the public portal before reaching my inbox. Chief Strategy Partner, Transitional Phase Role. The language was careful, timeline ambiguous, but every qualification was mine. Cross-border merger leadership, tactical intelligence integration, scalable defense architecture. I recognized phrases from my own presentations, including a transition I'd used during NATO preparation sessions. No one informed me of the opening, yet it was clearly my position rebranded, stripped of title, cushioned with vagueness. priced higher. They hadn't erased me. They'd reissued me without attribution. The posting wasn't internal only. It had gone through a retained firm I'd previously worked with. One of their partners, unaware of the internal shift, forwarded it with a knowing note. Looks like they want a Vivian 2.0. I didn't respond. I simply read each line. They hadn't removed my structure. They were licensing it without context or control. I waited 3 days before checking our internal systems. No mention of the transition in executive threads, just reshuffled calendars, new subgroups forming under someone I hadn't hired. At Friday's town hall, they spoke of evolving leadership, operational fluidity, and leveraging foundational knowledge. Never once did they say my name, yet they utilized everything I'd constructed. There's a particular silence when people pretend you were never essential, in how they reference your frameworks without citation, mirror your language, then redirect credit. One VP referred to legacy infrastructure decisions we're fortunate to have inherited. He was discussing a system I designed in 2019, which he had once vehemently opposed. I didn't argue or explain. I simply reviewed a document I'd drafted 2 years earlier, a subsidiary clause in our international defense client licensing agreement. Technically complex, buried in cross-border compliance, it contained one significant sentence. In the event of non-consensual leadership displacement, architecture rights revert to the originator unless explicitly reassigned. Nothing had been reassigned. They'd assumed silence meant surrender. I reopened old deal folders, labeling each clause, tagging every dependency. I didn't escalate, I archived. They were about to learn that you cannot restructure a system while standing on a foundation you no longer own. They assumed I had stepped aside. Instead, I created Talora, a clean vehicle with no links to my name, no shared ownership, no internal trace. Just a Delaware-registered special-purpose entity with silent capital from foreign investors who owed me favors, and one former legal officer who knew exactly how to obscure trails. Talora Partners wasn't built to litigate. It was built to acquire quietly, predictably, patiently. I started small, minority shares from disengaged early investors I'd met during my North Point days. Most didn't question who was behind the acquisition. They simply saw an opportunity to exit at premium rates before the next instability wave. I provided what they needed: clean wire transfers and confidentiality clauses. Inside Vistara, no alerts triggered because no single transfer crossed disclosure thresholds. Each remained under 4.5%, filed through standard intermediaries, backed by a clause I'd quietly helped insert 2 years prior. Strategic equity movements not requiring board notification unless cumulative voting power is altered. That clause had once protected us from hostile external takeovers. Now it protected me. By month's end, Talora held 18.6% of the company. Nothing alarming on paper, but layered with 2 other SPVs I'd helped structure, both managed by people with no known connections to me. We were approaching decisive weight, the kind that could call votes, block moves, or demand board representation. Marcus didn't notice. He was busy onboarding the Boston candidate, Evan Burke, a man with impressive credentials and a talent for meaningless phrases. Observing his introduction presentation from the back row, he used terms like synergy gatekeeping and scaled modularity, words that sounded substantial but conveyed nothing. He clicked through slides that looked disturbingly familiar. One was a rebranded version of my 2021 NATO adaptation model. They hadn't even changed the color scheme. That afternoon, I archived the deck and requested a meeting with Maya, my last remaining confidant in legal. She didn't press for details. She'd worked with me long enough to know that quiet requests meant the answers mattered more than explanations. By week's end, her reply was clear, precise, and exactly what I needed. The framework I'd built for NATO still registered under my name. The internal license Vistara used to apply it had expired, and renewal was never filed. In their rush to erase me, they'd forgotten to handle the paperwork. I closed the file, updated Talora's holdings to 21%, and continued listening. No need to challenge them yet, not while they remained committed to their performance. The real show would come later. For now, I just needed one more investor to sell, and someone already had their finger on the exit button. They constructed their rollout calendar around silence. Week by week, I watched them phase me out methodically. My name vanished from internal decks, My input slots on executive reviews replaced by Evan's draft in progress placeholders. Meanwhile, the company began presenting my models as evergreen frameworks, using them freely and confidently, as if strategy could be separated from the strategist. I allowed this because every time they presented a version of my work, I documented it, not emotionally but legally. There's a clause buried deep in the intellectual licensing package from our North Point transaction. It never made headlines but passed legal review because I'd advocated for it, phrased in neutral, asset origin contingency language. Few ever asked what it meant. Fewer still read that far. Clause 17.3 reads, "In the event that the originating strategist of integrated frameworks is formally removed from operational authority without successor acknowledgement, all non-renewed assets revert to the author after 90 days. It wasn't meant to be triggered, it was meant to prevent quiet theft. And they had walked directly into it. Day 82 since my alignment review, and not a single internal document had cited me. No footnotes, no legacy credits. I maintained records, timestamps, screenshots, meeting minutes, investor Q&A sessions where Evan paraded a hybrid version of my trilateral rollout sequence without understanding what each sequence implied. They believed confident presentation would carry the content. The thing about complex strategy is it breaks without the context that built it. I contacted my IP counsel under Talora's banner. We didn't send a cease and desist. That would have been loud. We sent a verification request to Vistara's general counsel. Quiet, professional, just a question. Could they confirm authorship provenance for the frameworks used in their upcoming platform pitch to the European Defense Coalition? The response was vague acknowledgement that legacy contributions were collective and that no active attribution was required under the current structure. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Their response was logged, dated, and ready. Clause 17.3 didn't require a fight, just proof they had moved forward without me. Maya pinged me an hour later off system. "You're within your window." I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me, we were 91 days in. By then, Talora held 26% of Vistara's equity, not controlling yet, but close enough to draw questions, especially once the clause activated. The moment it did, all frameworks reverted. Any public pitch built on my work would require retroactive licensing, and I had no intention of granting one. The impact wasn't instant, but inside the boardroom, I knew it would be felt. Strategy is the spine of funding. If investors sense fracture, if they realize the intellectual backbone of a proposal is under dispute, they pull, not because of drama, because of risk. That was the real trigger. Not the clause itself, but knowledge that the person they'd written out still held the blueprint and could revoke the architecture holding the house up. I didn't call a lawyer, I called an analyst. 2 days later, that analyst quietly downgraded Vistara's internal innovation rating from structured to under review. They wouldn't notice at first, but their investors would. They booked the room 2 weeks in advance. Top floor, neutral lighting, bottled water with minimalist labels, full AV team to elevate optics. They wanted the room to project control, even as the foundation beneath it shifted. The event was framed as a forward vision summit. Evan would present the platform roadmap to government liaisons, defense contractors, and 2 foreign attaches who had flown in under commercial names. It was meant to be his moment, to show they had direction after the merger, that strategy hadn't left with me. I watched from the back row. I didn't need clearance. The invite was sent to Talora, and no one bothered cross-referencing attendees. My name was printed under an alias, one of several identities I'd used over the years when mapping acquisition targets. It was fitting. The company I once built from within now saw me as an external observer. Evan stood confidently, clicking through slides he barely understood. He spoke of modular rollouts, phase-matched integration, quantum adaptive latency reduction, words meaningless to anyone who had actually built the infrastructure. One attaché leaned to whisper to another during the 3rd segment. I didn't hear the exact words, I didn't need to. I knew that look. The one you give when you realize the map you're holding has no terrain beneath it. Slide 11 was when I stopped taking notes. It was my tri-point network model, cropped, flattened, and relabeled but stripped of its sequencing logic. The transitions were missing, the order rearranged, the dependencies blurred. It looked like strategy but didn't breathe like one. Behind me, I heard a soft click. One of the government analysts closed their laptop early. The final slide listed projected outcomes. $140 million in streamlined defense contracts, 17% operational efficiency, and a 20-month path to dominance. None of those numbers had sourcing, they were estimates. Impressive at first glance, hollow upon impact. After the session, the room emptied faster than expected. Conversations were polite, no direct challenges, but fewer handshakes than usual, and one high-ranking procurement lead left without taking the printed summary deck. That was the tell. 3 hours later, my procurement contact confirmed it. 2 exploratory bids were paused. 1 moved to indefinite hold. I didn't issue statements or leak the clause. I didn't need to. I simply adjusted access permissions on my archive system. The framework files, the real ones with embedded logic chains, were no longer viewable. Not by chance, not even by cached preview. The next morning, internal IT flagged legacy document disruptions. Evan called a meeting to review. I wasn't invited, but Maya forwarded me the recap. No one could explain why the pitch failed to convert. The words were there, the flow was there, but the confidence was missing. It wasn't sabotage, it was subtraction. They had tried to echo my voice without learning how to breathe in it. The numbers started shifting in week 14, not dramatically, just enough to unsettle. 2.1% dip in contract stability, drop in procurement responsiveness, internal SLAs breached for the first time in 8 quarters. Finance flagged it as post-merger friction. Ops called it temporary market lag. Evans said nothing at all. But I watched the data differently because I knew where the pressure points were buried. Every deliverable they launched relied on 3 interlocking flows: licensed architecture, time-based synchronization, and a defensive offset I had embedded for risk throttling. Those weren't just operational tools. They were contractually shielded sequences validated under the North Point deal, protected under the framework clause. The moment they lost rights to the logic, they lost the glue between milestones. Then came the quarterly investor call. Evan opened with a wide smile and flat eyes. Post-integration metrics are stabilizing. Platform alignment is progressing as planned. It sounded polished, rehearsed. But when Q&A opened, the 4th question shattered the rhythm. A defense analyst from Hayward Capital asked directly, "Can you explain the 11% drop in data cohesion since Phase 2 launched, and why the efficiency model shown last quarter has been withdrawn from the investor portal?" There was a pause, too long. Evan looked down, mumbled something about live recalibration, said it was standard adjustment. But investors know. They always know when numbers wobble and explanations thin out. Capital moves. By the next morning, 2 things happened. First, Vistara's data partner, one of our most stable vendors, requested clarification on IP rights linked to Architecture 2.7. Second, a renewal contract with a NATO-aligned logistics group was returned and signed. No reasons, just silence. I wasn't surprised. That architecture version was one of the last still legally traceable to me without renewed license. Any expansion based on it would place Vistara in breach, not of ethics, but of enforceable compliance. Maya pinged me again. "You ready for the next layer?" I nodded. Talora's silent holdings had reached 29%. That gave me visibility not just into votes, but into internal ledger variances. And the discrepancies were mounting. One department had reallocated $4.2 million to contingency project alignment. A vague term, but I knew what it meant. They were trying to recreate what had been lost, hiring consultants to reverse engineer logic that had never been documented because I kept transitions in my head, then in locked systems, then in clauses they didn't read. At this stage, they weren't running strategy. They were chasing ghosts. Soon their own board would start asking questions. The first rumor landed in a Tuesday board email: possible interest from external party. Just 6 words embedded in a larger thread about strategic positioning. The tone was neutral, no urgency, as if being bought wasn't a threat, just a conversation starter. By Thursday, it had evolved into a formal agenda item: preliminary offer, discussion, discreet. The offer itself hadn't arrived yet, but its shape had: a name they didn't recognize, an entity with international credibility, clean structure, deep funding, and a reputation for reviving troubled portfolios. They called it a lifeline. I called it Talora. But no one at Vistara made the connection because I never left a trail. The equity had been layered carefully through multiple jurisdictions, each routed through holding instruments with no ties to my personal name. Even the operating partner listed on the letter of intent was 2 degrees removed from me. Marcus brought it to the board with practiced calm. They see potential. They want to support the next stage of our platform. Evan added that the buyer was known for respecting legacy structures, which, ironically, they believed still referred to their own. The offer was precise. 41% acquisition of outstanding equity staged over 90 days at a valuation 12% higher than Vistara's current market ceiling. To the board, it looked generous. To me, it was exactly the number I knew they couldn't refuse. They began internal modeling that afternoon. Finance projected operational relief. Ops pitched realignment initiatives. Legal skimmed the buyer's compliance history. None realized the documents they were reviewing had been written using templates I had commissioned. At 29% holding, Talora couldn't force a buyout, but with support from just 2 institutional investors, both quietly aligned with me through side letter agreements, we crossed the 51% threshold within a week. They still didn't know because I let them believe this was rescue, not return. The vote was scheduled on a Monday morning. Marcus opened with a polished statement on responsible succession. Evan spoke of strategic acceleration. One board member asked about operational continuity. Another asked if the buyer had transition leadership in mind. That was the cue. My representative stood, sliding a folder across the table. Yes. The board already knows her. She built the architecture you're still using. A pause. She just never left. The silence lasted 13 seconds. Then Marcus asked flatly, "Who owns Talora?" That was the moment they knew, because the answer had been in front of them the whole time. They had tried to replace the architect, and in doing so, they sold the house back to her, brick by brick, clause by clause. The papers were already signed before the board even gathered. Not by them, by me. 3 filings. One with the SEC confirming Talora's acquisition threshold had crossed into majority, one with the Department of Defense reaffirming licensing continuity under new leadership, and one sealed and time-stamped, executing the dormant clause embedded in Vistara's internal charter. In the event of controlling interest transfer, current executive designations dissolve pending board reappointment. It was a clause they had added during the North Point merger, meant to protect themselves from external disruption. I had suggested it, and now it executed itself. When I entered the room, I didn't sit at the side. I took the chair Marcus used to occupy. No one objected, not out of politeness, out of recognition. James, my legal partner from Talora, handed each board member a copy of the transition packet. Inside was the full breakdown: voting shares, compliance verifications, asset continuity plans, and the new leadership framework.
My name was printed on the top line.
No title needed, just presence. Evan tried to speak first. "We need time to review this." His voice wasn't firm, rehearsed but brittle. Marcus didn't speak at all. I looked at Janet, one of the few board members still reading carefully. She had been on the board since the Robert Hale era. She nodded once. That was enough. "Effective today," I said, "operational authority reverts to the architect of record. All prior platform strategies using legacy assets must be registered for revalidation. All transition clauses are now active." Marcus finally leaned forward. "This isn't how we do things." I didn't smile then. That may be why we're here. The vote was procedural, uneventful. The numbers were already there. 4 votes in favor, 2 abstained, 1 resigned mid-call. By 10:41 a.m., both Marcus and Evan had been officially removed from their roles. No appeals, no transitions. James handed them packets of their own: legal offboarding, restriction notices, final compensation schedules. Marcus tried to slide his across the table without opening it. James didn't take it back. "It's yours." Security wasn't called. They left on their own, slowly, silently. Evan didn't take his laptop. Marcus paused at the door as if he might say something, then walked out. And just like that, the strategy they tried to erase was now the structure they reported to. The meeting continued. We confirmed retention plans, reopened licensing lines, re-engaged the NATO-aligned contractor with a verified protocol they thought had expired. It hadn't. I had simply locked it until the right moment. One board member leaned over during the break. "You planned this whole thing from the day they sidelined you, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She nodded. I would have too. The first sign came at 6:42 the next morning, an IT ticket flagged as urgent. Evan's assistant couldn't log into his inbox. Then Marcus's calendars failed. Then Cascade. 12 more users lost access to shared drives, project boards, and strategic archives.
They assumed it was a system glitch.
It wasn't. It was execution. The offboarding packages they had received weren't ceremonial. They were complete. Credentials revoked, legacy permissions erased, shared platforms reset with new encryption tied to Talora's infrastructure. The logic they had tried to reuse had reverted quietly, cleanly, and permanently. They had underestimated one simple thing. Strategy isn't just slides and headlines. It's how systems talk to each other. And every system they touched had been built with fallback protocols. My protocols. Maya texted me mid-morning. Their group chat is imploding. Says they never documented where the master access keys live. I replied. They didn't. I did. The transition looked smooth on paper because I made it that way. One-click revocation, one-click rebuild. The only thing they didn't expect was how fast the structure would realign without them. Legal attempted contact at noon, an email to Talora's general counsel requesting temporary access for compliance review. The response was brief. As per the executed charter clause and IP reversion agreements, access to legacy content is closed to non-active executives. No apology, no explanation, just law. Yet the most telling silence wasn't technical, it was cultural. No one reached out to ask why, no one lobbied for a second chance. The same directors who once posted half-hearted praise under Evan's product launches now posted nothing. The platform went quiet, internal chat channels slowed. The fear wasn't of me, it was of structure. They had operated in a system they thought they understood until it collapsed from rules they forgot were written. By Friday, 3 departments submitted budget realignments without being asked. 2 external vendors requested reintroduction meetings to clarify new leadership direction. And the most vocal executive supporter of Evan deleted his LinkedIn headline. I didn't need to remind anyone what had happened. The systems were doing that for me. What surprised me most was the final access report. Among the off-boarded profiles was a shared inbox labeled Strategy Sync East. It had housed weekly feedback notes, platform adjustment drafts, even vendor assessments. The log showed only 2 active contributors in the last 6 months, myself and someone else who had copied, downloaded, and forwarded every document to an unsecured cloud folder. The name on the account, Evan Burke. He hadn't just tried to reuse my frameworks, he had attempted to move them off system, likely to reskin and pitch elsewhere. But he had failed to notice the embedded tracker in every document, a microflag I had set years ago, visible only when access permissions broke. He had been building his escape route with stolen scaffolding, and now it was flagged, documented, and preserved. I didn't call legal, I didn't need to anymore. I didn't return to the old office, not once. The chair they had rolled away now sat empty in the corner of the new strategy floor, out of frame, left like a reminder. The room was redesigned, not bigger, just cleaner. Every system restructured under Talora's architecture, every permission rebuilt. No grandfathered access, no exceptions. The first quarter post-transition ran lean by design. I canceled 2 legacy contracts, paused a global expansion initiative, and halted a European licensing deal Evan had been pushing. Investors called it a correction. I called it a reset. What we kept were the systems that worked and the people who understood what it meant to work without noise. No more vision decks, no more empty metrics, just execution. When NATO reached back out, I didn't send a proposal. I sent a protocol signed under my name, time-stamped, licensed, and owned. They approved in 5 days. When the Department of Defense renewed our framework agreement, they didn't ask for clarification. They knew the design and they knew who stood behind it. That was the difference. I never chased titles, I chased control. Not to hold it, but to ensure no one else could weaponize what they didn't understand. The former executives moved on. Marcus joined a small analytics firm. Evan took a consulting role overseas, trying to rebuild relevance without the language he had borrowed. I didn't reach out. I didn't need closure. I already had clarity. The board restructured. 2 stepped down. 1 stayed and apologized, not with words, but with alignment, and 1 quietly invested in Talora's second vehicle. Off the record, we never used the word revenge. We used realignment. The team called the new structure whole-level logic, a joke at first, but it stuck because they finally understood. Strategy wasn't about appearing smart. It was about building systems that cannot be quietly stolen. 6 months later, I received an invite, a closed-door roundtable of national contractors. Topic: Architecting systems with unbreakable logic. They wanted me to speak, not as a case study, as a model. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just sent a copy of the clause that ended the board. The final slide read, "Ownership is not declared. It is designed."